Good morning. I am Ted Diamantis, and thank you for coming. And this is our third stop in our terroir trip around the country, and our final stop in New York. And thank you for coming to seminar number one. I want to welcome George Skouras from Domaine Skouras and Doug Frost, our friend and colleague, and one of the people that kick cords around constantly. One of our great advocates from Greece, a friend of ours that's been working with us for years, and for the people who don't know, he's one of the very few rare birds that has a couple more initials behind his name than everybody else. He's an MS and MW, one of only 4 people in the world. So happy to have Doug here, and happy to have you guys here in a chilly winery. So we really wanted to, bring you into the winery environment and really feel next to the wine. So here you go. But today, what we're going to be doing in seminar number one, and our goal for the symposium tour has been from day one, is to kind of elevate the conversation around wine, to talk about farming, to talk about clone selection, to talk about varieties, to talk about things that are much more applicable than just to Greek wine. Greek wine here today will be the vehicle of illustrating these things, but it's more about putting some knowledge out there and giving you guys more information that's applicable to your whole wine life. Now, hopefully, we're going to achieve that by the end of the day today, and hopefully you guys will sit through all 3 seminars. And if you can't, we're filming this today, so you guys are all live, and we're going to be throwing this up on our websites and also have it available to you via a thumb drives too later on if you guys are interested. So having said all that and setting the table for these wonderful wines and these, I guess, us and you, I'm going to hand this over to Doug. If you're ready, Doug. Are you ready, Doug? You're always ready. Okay.
Well, I guess I will use a microphone just so people in the back can hear okay. The quick answer, the quick answer to the question really is why we're here is, yeah, what? Okay, I will. That's okay, I want to talk to these people. I'll be back, Raul, it's all right. The quick answer as to why we're here is to focus in on Greek wines. We're going to have the opportunity to do that with George Skouras, with Pyrgela, with Angelo and Stelios later on today if you're around for the whole thing. So if you're not, don't worry about it. I would just say, if you can stick around, it's pretty cool. We're going to try to cover different subject matter each go-round. And, well, we're going to look at Greece, obviously. I don't feel like I have to do a super deep dive on this. I think everybody has some understanding of why, you showed up because you obviously think something is happening in Greece and have probably bought into it previous to this. So I'll just do the kind of the super fast. What is Greece? 51,000 square miles or so. That about 10,000 of that is coastline. There's 11 million people here. There are about a quarter of the landscape is actually islands, of which there are 3,000, only 63 of which are inhabited. But if you get the idea that we're surrounded by a bunch of water, yeah, that's it, okay? And why is that important to us? Because I think that when we talk about a lot of the grape varieties that we're going to talk about today, we're dealing with grape varieties that I think are very special for this place. And by that I mean you can get low pH, high acid wines despite the fact that it's a hot, very dry environment. Indeed, if I were a California winemaker right now with climate change and all, I would be grubbing up some Muscafilero and Assyrtiko and, Vidiano and what else? I don't know. But these grapes have been bred for this problem, if you will, of hot and dry environment and nonetheless end up with these crazy pHs as we're going to see in some of these wines in this seminar and throughout the day, right? So to continue on just thinking about this landscape itself, what I would say is that it's, surrounded by water, I get that. What that allows me to do is lengthen the growing season. It cools things off. It keeps things more moderated than it would otherwise be. We've already talked about the varieties already help you bring some pH thresholds, if you will, to the winemaking process. But then the other issue, if you're trying to cool things off, get up in the mountains. Guess what? It's very, very mountainous here. Basically, the Pindos Mountains are just an extension of the Alps. They run down from northwest to southeast. Indeed, the reason that we have all these islands out here, in many cases in the Aegean or it's the peaks of the continuation of the Pindos range. Now, in terms of having some flat space to work with, there's pretty much not much there, okay? The plain of Thessaly, the plains of Macedonia and Thracia, and that's it. That's, that's all you got. Everything else is mountainous. In terms of the soil types that you're dealing with here, limestone, sandstone, sedimentaries. When we get to the plains, of course, you have some nice clay and these 4 or 5 little spots there. Up in the north and northwest, you're going to see more igneous rocks. And then, of course, on the islands, we see a lot more volcanics. But it's a fairly uniform set of soils compared to a lot of crazy cool places like California. Now, finally, if you will, as we're trying to understand what's happening here, is there are about, well, actually, if I go back about 20 years ago, there are about 100,000 hectares or so planted. Today, there's only about 66,000 hectares planted or so. So it is a country that is shrinking its vineyard space. On the other hand, a lot of you have heard about the famous economic tribulations of this particular country. This is one of the sectors that's doing quite well. So what's happening here is I think we're seeing something of a rationalization of this area. And that's to say, we're focusing on the areas that are more likely to give us excellent wine and maybe not focused as much, I hope. I think this is certainly true, maybe not focused as much on quantity as we are on quality, all right? Now, to go back to this 100,000 or 66,000 hectares or so, we have about 7,000 growers in total. Of those, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that only about 10% of those have more than, let me do the math, have more than about 10 acres or so, and only about 50 of them have more than about 24 or 25 acres. That's it. Yep. So we talk about small-scale viticulture a lot of times when we talk about wine regions. Here, I think we can really say, no, that's exactly what's happening. Now, this place is a very dry place, as I've already alluded to. There's few rivers. Most of them dry up by the end of the summer anyway. But though, it is a country that is still focused and reliant upon its agricultural base, it is a dry farmed place by and large. What that means, of course, is that it's dry and hot, so you don't have as many vine diseases and pests as you might otherwise have. And so before it was cool, this place is organic. It's organic because poor people can't afford the expensive chemicals, all right? This is just the facts. I'm sorry, it's one of those weird things. You go to Central Asia and they extol their food there because we're too poor to buy the chemicals you people in the West like. And it's like, you're right. Actually, there are advantages to fine living, aren't there? Now, before we do this any farther, quick history lesson. I'm just going to take 2 seconds to do this. Of course, Greece is our first outpost, if you will, for civilized living, perhaps certainly when it comes to an all-encompassing wine culture, a wine religion, a society focused on wine as part of its culture and religion and philosophical underpinnings. We can talk about that further, but for my purpose, I think what's more interesting or maybe more relevant is to ask ourselves, if they had a 5,000-year head start, why aren't they in charge? Why are we only now learning about them? And I guess I'd start that little story off by saying 146 BC, that's when the Romans tromp in, as the Romans tend to do, and win quickly because they're very good at that. And they take over. And interestingly, and this is not an unusual occurrence in Roman behavior, because they're this imperial power that, as imperial powers do, they come in, they take over, they take your raw goods, for free, of course, and then they convert them into something else and then sell them back to you, because that's, how imperial powers work. Just ask Africa. Anyway, the Romans do that, but one of the other interesting things about the Romans, and as I say, it's not isolated just to Greece, but Greece is an extreme example. They not only adopt the wine culture, because the Etruscans were a wine culture, but the Romans weren't initially a wine culture. They adopt the wine culture of Greece. They adopt the architecture of Greece. They adopt the art and the theater to some degree of Greece. They adopt the gods of Greece, okay? Yeah, this takes time. It's not like somebody waves a magic wand or signs an executive order and suddenly it happens. Sorry, that was only the first of the references you'll hear today. But it is that they took on the very philosophy, the gods, the language, for crying out loud. So much of what they took on when they invaded Greece it pervades to this day. Now, to continue the story, however, is to say, well, by 330 AD, the Romans are kind of out of business, and the Byzantium Empire is on and powerful. Excuse me, you need to get through? Yeah, you're fine, man. It's a working winery, damn it. So 330 AD, Byzantium is now, basically the power has shifted to what we would today call Istanbul or Constantinople. And it was still seen as a quote-unquote Roman Empire, but it's really not so much anymore. By the 600s or so, the Venetian doges off to the west are really ruling the high seas. And so they get to decide what's sold and at what price and who's taxed and who ain't. It is from this time that we begin well, or at least we could ask the question when Vino Santo of Italy starts up. And it's hard to say with some certainty, but what we can say with some certainty is that it was the Venetian doges saying, you know what, we've been buying this delicious sweet wine called Vinsanto from the island of Santorini, but we can make it ourselves, and then we don't have to pay those jerks. And that's basically what happens. They begin to make it themselves. The difference, of course, being that on the island of Santorini, you can lay the grapes out under the sun and dry them because it doesn't rain. We'll talk about Santorini later on. In Italy, of course, you have to put them in sheds and put little windows up because it rains, it mists, and the things would rot. But I digress. Let's get back to the story, which is by the 700s, we have barrels already at work in this culture. Let's fast forward, I think, probably to 1453. That's probably the next important date, because that's when the Ottoman Turks overrun Constantinople, take over, Byzantium is over, and as they take over Greece and so much of the rest of that empire, it's a Muslim culture. So wine, nah. Actually, wine, yeah, we'll just tax the shit out of it. That's what we do, because we're smart. We're, again, a very smart empire and doing its thing. And so, yeah, wine continues, but it's really under heavy taxation now and great burden. Now in 1821, yeah, it's a long time later, but in 1821 they're finally routed and run out of Greece, and they say thank you very much for the long stay by burning all of the vineyards and all the fields and destroying everything behind them. By 1830, Greece is actually a republic. By 1898, interestingly, a new wine business gets started in Greece, and it's based around a grape called Korintiaki. And the reason that it's happening is because phylloxera has been destroying everything in Europe, as you probably know. A bug that comes from North America, you're welcome, along with powdery mildew and downy mildew, but that's, again, a different story. Anyway, Korintiaki's great virtue is that you can grow a huge crop of this stuff, and then you can dry the grapes down into raisins. Again, we do this outside. It's easy to do. Throw out aspartame mats or what have you. And then you ship the grapes to France, where they add water. I'm not kidding. This is exactly what people did. And you make wine. No, seriously, it was an enormous business. In 1898, it completely revolutionized the Greek wine industry. People start ripping up old vines and planting Korintiaki. There's all this money in it. Problem is that in 1898, that's when phylloxera first shows up in Greece too. You know the end of this story. Meanwhile, in Bordeaux and elsewhere, they've decided they know how to plant. They just plant North American vines, since that's where the bug comes from, and then graft European, the vinifera onto the top of those North American roots. And so much for the Korintiaki market, which completely collapses the German wine industry. Well, let's see, 1912 Balkan Wars, World War I, World War II. Oh, after that, oh gosh, because the 20th century really was a good laughing time. After that, Civil War, 1967 and 1974 is the military junta. So, it is not an exaggeration to say that this is the first generation in 2,000 years or so in Greece that has not lived under occupation. So when we ask ourselves why have they not built a successful wine industry, I think we have some idea now. They've been a speed bump between warring cultures for a couple of millennia, and that carries some risk. So, to talk about 5,000 years of history is probably misleading. We should really be talking about 30 years of modern winemaking, as Greece finally has been allowed to decide its own fate. Oh, that's right. Germany's in charge of the EU. Okay, kind of, sort of. At least we can say, sort of. Anyway, the pioneers are here. The people who have done this work over the last 30 years, they're here. And I would turn the floor over to George Skouras now to take us to a particular place, the Peloponnese, which is, as you can see here, very mountainous. There's 7 peaks that are anywhere from 4,500 to 7,600 feet in elevation. Yeah, it's
78.
78, exactly. Here we go.
Well, thank you very much. I got one.
Oh, you have your own?
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for coming. And I'm George Skouras. I'm coming from Greece. I am a winemaker and owner of the Domaine Skouras, and I am situated at Nemea. Nemea, as you can see, this is Peloponnese, and Nemea, it is in northeast of Peloponnese. I have to explain, may I, over there, thank you very much. So Peloponnese, it is really south of Athens, south of Greece, and it's a place which there is high temperatures all the days, and it's a place really marvelous for having vineyards. That's because of a lot of mountains. As you can see in this land, there is a lot of mountains all over, and this land it is covered like 85% by mountains. Unbelievable. Mountains, to me, it is when I'm looking at the top of the mountain, because the top of the mountain is much cooler than in every other region. The top of the mountain for us, it is the refrigerator of our land. Why? Because all this colder climate goes down. And that's fantastic for the vineyards, and it is very nice for the fruits. That's one thing which is very, very important. And the other thing it is, as Peloponnese is almost, it is a peninsula, but it is almost an island, a big island. There's a lot of winds coming from the sea because it's entered by seawater. By the ocean, and all those winds are accelerated, through the mountains because of the phenomenon Bernoulli, and through this acceleration you have some windy conditions. Windy conditions is something very important for the grapes because there is no humidity. Yeah, sure, that's one thing. No humidity means no pesticides. No pesticides means, healthy grapes, and healthy grapes means very good wine. That's very important. Speaking about this area, we have to speak about, let's see, Nemea, yes, yeah. So this is something I have to explain to you. You can see all these beautiful mountains, and then just there you see a small plateau. And then there is mountains over there, a small plateau here. And this is how the region is. There is like 17 different villages existing in this appellation, the appellation of Nemea, in which 100% must be Ayurgetico. Ayurgetico grape variety. Can you pronounce the Ayurgetico? Okay, let's do that. Let's do that together. Ayurgetico. Ayurgetico. Thank you. You speak Greek now. To explain a little bit more about Nemea, it's a place with, we start like 600 feet of altitude and go up to 3,400 feet of altitude. And all that, it is like mountains and plateaus and mountains and plateaus and mountains and plateaus. Unbelievable. There is more than 20 small plateaus all over, and those sides of the mountains, they are fantastic for having vinegar there. And of course, you can imagine that on those different altitudes, there is different microclimates, different soils, and it is very difficult to have a typicity in this area. So we speak about villages, and we speak about typicity of every village, different in a different way. And this is the famous Ayurgetico. 2 words about Ayurgetico. The Ayurgetico grape variety, it is a grape variety with thin skins. Thin skins, it's not good for having so much structure, you see. So we try a lot to have our vineyards, please.
Yeah.
Sorry. What time did I? Sorry. Yeah. To have these vineyards in these areas and to get a little bit of massage on their skins. What that means, how we do that. Windy conditions, I told you, windy conditions, it is always press a lot the grapes and the skin becoming thicker. And big difference between night and day temperatures, you know, because the day temperatures is high, and because of the altitude, the night temperatures, it is much less. There is always, you know, a little. This difference produce a lot of thicker skins. But also, we work in the Ayurgetico, like to work a little bit like Pinot Noir, you know, and we try to have very nice levels of maturity and very mature seeds. So we work on the seeds, and we get structure from the seeds, which is the structure of the seeds. If the seeds, they are really mature, it is fantastic. And it's like, you know, it's like a velvet texture. So the wines we have, we will see the 04 Nemea, the Grand Cuvée Nemea, the 06, and the 2012. Let's see a little bit where this beautiful vineyard is. It is 3,400 feet of altitude. It is the highest vineyard existing in Nemea and one of the highest in Europe. Up there, it's really cold. You can see it's me and the God. We have a very interesting soil, which is a deep red soil full of minerality and full of small mineral items like volcanic graves, volcanic gravels. You know, it's a soil in which when you go to walk between the vineyards, you smell like it smells like copper coin. Up there's this Ayurgetico, and it comes in maturation almost a month after every other. It comes to maturation in in the second week in October. Of course, because of these extreme conditions, there is a very nice, crisp skins and high altitudes. The 2004, you have the first. It's a wine. It is the most authentic vintage I had in my life. When the grapes, the harvest arrives to the winery, we calculate like 12 grams of acid per liter. Unbelievable. The wine was really difficult to manage. It took 2 years to have a full malolactic fermentation and have a diminution of this acidity. And when we bottled the wine, the wine was undrinkable. So
enjoy.
So we put the wine, you know, aside in the cellar, and we released the wine 10 years later, and the wine was just marvelous. You have the wine in front of you. Really, the 2004, it was one of the most cold weather, and we have the opportunity to see them because we really did a nice job on this wine.
Yeah. Shall we talk about the wines a little bit? I'll ask them. It's up to you, really. As you can tell, I don't necessarily believe in the idea that somebody's going to lead you through the tasting. Rather, you guys are all good tasters. You folks have plenty of skills where that's concerned. So if you don't mind yelling out any descriptors that you have for these, let's start off with the 04. I mean, is it still quite tart? Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's one of those, it underscores, I suppose, my theme from the outset when I was saying, look, these are great varieties that despite the weather, despite the conditions, despite the heat, can retain their acidity. This is a bit of a, a clown car filled with all that. I mean, it has really, really intense acidity. And the idea of 12 grams, I mean, that's at least double what any, typical must would have. Yeah, question here. Yes. Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the questions about Ayurvedico in general. And so when George starts, there's really nobody making quality wine out of Ayurvedico. I think the whole idea is a little bit crazy at that point. So probably the first question goes to you, George, which is, why did you have it in your mind to do anything with Ayurvedico since nobody took it seriously but you? And did you take it seriously? And secondarily, what have you learned about extraction? In terms of trying to manage tannins or not?
I think that the answer will be to the second wine, which is the Megasinus.
Yep.
Because when I started, really, I knew nothing about the Ayurvedico. I had studies in France, and then working all over Europe and back in Greece, working there. And in 1986, I started my first winery at the garage of my father. That was... That's a winery. That was not a winery, that was just some 2-3 barrels and renting facilities, renting vineyards and everything. I got a beautiful motocross.
Kawasaki 250.
Kawasaki 250, and that
the 250
was,
Enduro,
yeah.
the dirt bike of my high school. Okay, just so we know my high school years.
And I enjoyed to do to discover the whole Nemea, because Nemea it's big. And my Kawasaki, it was fantastic to go through the mountains and discover where it is, But yes, when I started, I was not really, always in my life I had my, my studies, France, French varieties and all that stuff. And I started to discover the Ayurvedico. And believe me or not, it took me like 30 years. And now I say, with my team and we say, now we start. And now we start to do wines really 100% Ayurvedico, different single vineyards, and we will see some wines of that come on the future.
Yeah, bear in mind that just to set the table a little bit further from what Doug and George are alluding to, that Nemea prior to the mid-'80s and most likely towards the mid-'90s was making mostly bulk wine. It was dominated by bulk winemakers. There were small producers, but they, again, were making bulk wines to sell to negociants and or the co-op. There were no estates. There were no individual artisanal vinification occurring in Nemea. There was no site-specific Ayurvedico. Ayurvedico varies throughout this whole appellation. It's like looking at Napa prior to Warren Winarski coming in and doing Stag's Leap District wines. How everybody was blending throughout Napa Valley. The same thing was going on through Nemea. And there's a different character of fruit throughout the entire appellation because you have sandy soils, you have calcareous soils, you have red rocky volcanic soils, you have high mineral content soils. And the most important thing about the appellation is elevation. Because really the character of the fruit changes with the elevation, with the yields as well. Here we're talking yields about 1.5 to 2 tons per acre. On Megainos, we're going to look at 1 ton and less in terms of yields, and that really changes the character. George told me years ago that when he was asked this by somebody, aren't you bored just working with one red variety? And he goes, absolutely not, because depending on where I'm at in the appellation, the elevation I'm at, where I'm cropping, the age of the vine, I can make different styles of wine from one variety. George's word for this is polydynamic. So it's a variety that he loves to play with. And here we're looking at one of the most extreme examples. And to just, again, restate that this vineyard is at 3,400 feet elevation. This is arguably one of the highest red wine vineyards in all of Europe, if not the highest. And we're still waiting for other people to tell us about other red wine vineyards that are above this elevation. To this date, we really haven't identified any, but we're open to it. But from what we've been told, if it's not the highest, it's probably one of the top three highest in altitude in terms of red wine.
Okay, I'll go work on it.
Thanks. That's your next task.
And so glass number 6 is the 2006. What we're getting an opportunity to do today, and certainly for this seminar, is look at what age has done to these wines and what age, theoretically will do to the future wines. With the 04, I do believe it's a slightly anomalous wine because of those ripping acids. With 06, I think we're seeing something a little more typical of it. And so one of the questions we talked about, one of the issues we wanted to discover was how you handle extraction in tannin. So
Yeah.
for, so delestage, I mean, what
Yeah,
is- what is-
absolutely. What we do at the Juridico, because of creating a more and more structure, it is delestage. Delestage is something very important. Can you explain a little bit about the delestage,
Yeah,
Doug?
basically, in California, we just call it rack and return. The idea being you've got a tank this size, you can pump the juice out, and obviously during the settling process, as the cap begins to fall and fermentation ends, you're still going to have a lot of seeds in the bottom, and the seeds theoretically have harsher tannins to them. So theoretically, you could pump the juice off, let's say, 2/3 of the way down, have the seeds isolated there, the cap drops, but you can pull the seeds out and then flush the wine back in there, and you've removed some of the sources of the most difficult of the tannins or the catechins or the epicatechins. I will say to you that there's a lot of argument these days over whether delestage actually accomplishes that or does quite the opposite and creates so much of a chaotic environment in there and roughs the seeds up so much that you actually add tannin to it. So that would be the question, what's your goal?
Yeah, the goal, of course, the goal is to take some more structure,
Okay.
of course, and especially structure from the skins, as from the seeds, as you say.
Yeah.
In the same time, when you do we do just one delestage, and it's just one delestage in which we have a lot of oxygen amount of oxygen coming, because which is very important for the fermentation and everything, and of course all the other days of skin contact, it is with the punch downs, which is so gentle and nice, and Ayurvedico loves that. When the fermentation finished, after the maceration, all the wine go to the barrels, and we have second fermentation, malolactic fermentation, in the barrels. Okay, which is very nice because it keeps the fruit very nicely, and you can have all these beautiful fruits, which the fruit of the Ayurvedico, let me explain a little bit. It is the typical fruit you get in the nose. It is a lot of small red fruits, berries, cherries, all this, and sometimes liqueur de cerise, this kind of fruit, which is very, very nice, with a touch of violet, maybe, or a carnation flower. You can maybe find those small, nice aromas on the nose. And of course, Ayurvedico, it is very well named about velvet and nice and beautiful tannins. And this is the description of the Ayurvedico, yeah.
Okay, so to kind of review, rack and return, which is so often sold to us as a way to soften tannins, actually in this case is doing quite the opposite. It's extracting structure, giving us a bit more to work with, because Ayurvedico needs some of that. Now, George alluded to the notion of oxygen, this oxygen-rich environment. One of the new ideas that we're discovering, at least I think a lot of people are buying into, is this notion that fermentation is an oxygen-rich environment, but it's not one that needs a lot of sulfur, contrary to what everybody's taught in winemaking school. that in fact the yeast itself, the fermentation process will protect the wine. You don't need sulfur at this point. And if you use sulfur, what you'll do is you'll hinder the binding of tannins with anthocyanin and a coloring matter. Now, Ayurvedico is compared to Pinot Noir not improperly because it doesn't have a lot of anthocyanin material. So cold soak, are you a fan of cold soak at all? Yeah, and that would increase, some of your anthocyanin contents. You have a little more to work with, bind up a little bit more to create this stronger structure, I guess is the way I would put it. Fair enough?
And
Yeah.
George, do you think that the vineyard, the Grand Cuvée vineyard, and because of the tighter clusters and the small areas, do they give you more color than you would find in the Megainos vineyards or in your regular other Ayurvedico vineyards?
Thank you. I don't care about colors.
There you go. Never mind.
Yeah, color is something, we try, we do our best to get the most of the color, but color is something unstable, the most of the time colors go down. I don't care about colors. I care about maturity. I care about a lot of other things. Yes, in this vineyard there's a little bit more purple color than any other vineyard because of the high acidity, of the high elevation, and of course acidity, because in the circumstances of very low pH, mind you, the pH here must be something like 3.1, unbelievable. So in those pH, the color becomes blue. I mean, blue,
Theoretically, it's
yeah.
more stable as well. You'll see these, super
Yeah.
purple wines that you get out of, not to bash on California again, but California are the 4x4s of South Africa, what have you, and they're very purple early on, and they brown up super fast.
Voilà.
So should we move on to some little Megainos?
Yeah, I guess so.
Or should we go to the 12? I mean,
yeah, I was going to say,
let's
we
talk
didn't
about
really,
the 12 a little bit.
Yeah, we didn't really collect a lot of data about 5, 6, and 7. We talked about 5. 6, anybody else want to add anything with regards to 6 before we talk about 7? Thoughts about that? Yeah, please.
My question was, I noticed that you shifted over from the 2004. In 2006 and 2012, you had a different type of barrel, and I was just wondering if that's what you've used since then, and why did you switch?
We never stopped to have researchers on the barrels and things like that, 2004, we had, it is normally, the most of the barrels we use, it's from the center of France, because the Ayurvedico loves the center of France. The other, like limousine or things like that, it's not good for the Ayurvedico, because Ayurvedico, it's very fragile. But it is very, very important. The barrels we use, it is barrels we buy the wood. And we buy the wood, and we send the wood to our coppers, yeah? Yeah, and we dry the wood there for 4 years, drained.
The stays.
Yeah, the stage for 4 years, and that's something very, very, very important. Of course, it costs a lot of money, but it is the best, because when you have really well drained wood, then you can use that without having problem of what wood it is in the wine. In our winery, we don't love to smell the wood in our wines. So,
And George's, our barrels are typically 2 years dried, and you're
yeah,
doing
the most
4
of them,
years.
yeah, it's 2 years dried, yeah. That's all we can do for our Ayurvedico, and the profile. Of course, it is not 100% new wood. It is it depends. It is from 50 to 70%. 50-50 is the best, and we use just some new wood and some 1 year using the wood. Okay.
Okay. So any thoughts about the 2012? You get a
Of course,
chance.
I'm sorry. And of course, we our aging profile, always the wine, it is on very fine lees. And we do batonnage all this time, because that's protect a lot the wine by everything.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, that can create protection. It can obviously create weird sulfur compounds. So if you're doing a lot of batonnage, you may have to throw away a few barrels every now and then, but I think I think it's demonstrated that the structure is longer lasting. 2012, so now you get a chance to look at it with the 2012. You're not drinking a 13-year-old wine, not an 11-year-old wine. Now with the 2012, thoughts about that wine? Character, style, what have you? Are you Yitiko fresher, brighter, nice, easier to spot sort of varietal characteristics? Andy, I'm looking at you.
Much more primary.
Yeah.
So the fun thing about I worked backwards on this, and it was nice to watch the evolution of these wines. The 12, those really punchy, bright primary, and my first note was call me in 5 years.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think primary is fun. It's what we're trained to do. But what's really interesting about wines of these pHs is you don't have to drink them then. Something else is going to happen. Now, that'll bring up the old argument of, is it important if a wine lasts, or is it more important if a wine improves with age? And it's always debatable. It's up to you to decide if these wines actually have improved with age or simply have lasted and are not as interesting as the primary fruit is. But that's up to you. Should we go back to wines 1, 2, 3, 4 now and talk about Megasinus?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So
Megasinus, Megasinus story is like...
the first invention.
The first invention. My first winery, my first kid. 1986, like 30 years...
And again,
now,
you're tasting now. You're tasting 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry.
Yeah. My very first wine, 1986, so we do like 30 different vintages until now. We did. It is a wine really, one of the first red wines in the area, which was like the icon wineries for the next years and for the Greek industry. The Megas Enos comes from a beautiful mountain, which the name, it is Mega Mountain, and it takes the name from the mountain. And this is that, exactly. Yeah, may I have that? So as you can see, the soil here, it's an old photo. The soil here, it is rocky. It is rocky soils, gravel all over. It is very poor soils. There is no irrigation. It is very difficult to be cultivated in machinery, and the most of them is cultivated. And look at that by hand. And it's vineyards. These vineyards, there are 4 vineyards of Agorgitico and 1 vineyard of Cabernet Sauvignon. There is 20% of Cabernet Sauvignon and 80 Agorgitico. When I'm speaking 80 and 20, I'm speaking about surface of land covered by those 2 varieties, and not about weight or liters or something else. So that means that it is, of course, a little bit different, but this is...
In other words, what you're tasting 1, 2, 3, and 4, it's not exactly 80% Agorgitico and 20% Cabernet. It depends upon the vintage.
Exactly. So the big bet in this for those vineyards, for that wine, it is to express really the winemaker's philosophy. And the winemaker's philosophy in this winery, it is to have elegant wines. For us, it is very, very important. The wine, it's not the big guys with a lot of color and a lot of extraction and things like that. They are very elegant. Always, we try to have the best maturation of those grapes, and of course, we are helped a lot of the very low yields. The yields here on those vineyards, they are yields like 30 hectare, which is like Burgundies. Of course, we had many problems I want to go there. Yeah. I have to explain that those rocky soils, we change everything. The most you see, I'm speaking a little bit about the orientation of the vines. you see that normally we have this orientation. Normally, there is, when you have this orientation, you have east over here, west over here. But it is not if we have this orientation, sorry. No, yes. Again and again, yeah. If we have this kind of orientation, then we have a problem because here there is a lot of radiation and high temperatures which can affect the grapes. So we change the orientation to east, west. That means
Let
that.
me.
Okay,
Let me,
sorry.
Let
Let
me
me help.
interpret
Let
that.
me, it's
your
some help with
orientation
my
typically-
English. I'm sorry.
Typically, orientations are north-south, so you get afternoon and morning sun here. To shade the base of the vine, he's gone east-west. So that eliminates by creating a shadow on the base of the vine, it eliminates the radiation of heat upwards towards the fruit, which allows it to give more even phenolic ripeness. And it also heats the rows in between to drive the water table up towards the root system. Because this area is 100% dry farmed. This particular vineyard, for 9 years, it wasn't watered. There is drip irrigation set up here, but it's in extreme conditions that we need to use that. Plus, trucking water up to these mountains is very, very, very expensive. But it's also stylistically what George has always done is dry farm, low yield, high stress vineyards.
Yeah, and thank you, Ted. Thank you. I'm sorry for my English.
Glad
So
I'm-
I have to explain that those 4 vineyards, I found the vineyards, we bought the vineyards, and most of them, there is a lot of different ages of the vines. So the youngest is like 35 years old, and the oldest is like 60, 70 years old. Some of them, they are
Head pruned pre-phylloxera vines, just like right in here.
yeah. And it's one of the most beautiful vineyards in the area of Nemea.
And I'd ask the question about cover crop. With a hot, dry environment, how often do you find yourself using cover crop? Because it's obviously going to compete with the plants for moisture.
I'm sorry, I had
It's going to the cover crop that you're using here. That would compete with the vines for moisture. So how often do you find yourself using cover crop?
Sorry.
Do you tend... με τη χειρίδα σας επιτρέπεις να μεγαλώνουν τα χόρτα άμεσα τα αμπέλια επίτηδες ή...
So no, it is this kind of postale cover crop.
Cover crop.
Cover crop. It is they have not a lot of chance, because there is no water. So it is like to be neutral. It's just something. But the problem is because of the gravels and everything, it is very difficult to be cultivated, and it's for that you can see that. Yeah, that's all.
All right, so you're not sowing cover crop or
No.
selecting particular cover crop. Okay. It's a question I've been wanting to ask, as you can tell. Now, you have the wines in front of you, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. Why don't we start with this 2001, glass number 1. Thoughts about this wine? 16-year-old, 80% theoretically, 20% blend of Ayeritico and Cabernet Sauvignon. Thoughts? So do others agree with that? Anybody else, the old equal time for opposing views? So the question would be, well, actually, for my part, one of the things that I find interesting, if not fascinating, about these two grapes is that they seem fairly seamless with these two grapes next to each other, which I find a little odd, especially when you march through 01, 05, 10, and 12. There doesn't seem to be a point until you get to the 12 where the two grapes seem to be separate. So I find that in that sense, maybe the wine improves with some time. Thoughts on 05? Anybody want to add something to the 05? Anyone care to have a microphone shoved in their face? It's such a lovely experience. So, yes, no? Thoughts? Who likes? Equal time for opposing views? No, what do you think? Thoughts on 5? Am I just rushing you through these or something?
Take your time, and a little bit of information why George chose to use Cabernet, because obviously you've seen that in Grand Cuvée you can make well-structured wines that are ageable. The reason when George first came back to this region back in 86, 85, 86, I actually met George in 99, 90, and the first vintage I imported was the 88. So we've been at this a long time. And George at the time didn't know, because there was no model for this, if Argos can age. He believed that he needed to add Cabernet and the tannin component of Cabernet to make a better structured wine that's more cellarable. He wanted to make a statement. When I speak about this wine, and have been for the last 30 some years, or 25, I don't want to age myself too much. I also talk about that this was the wine that started the renaissance of Greek winemaking. This was the first wine, George, that was blended indigenous with a non-indigenous variety. He wanted to make a wine that made a statement about the region, the variety, himself, and the country of Greece. And I remember the first article ever written that was Frank Pryal. You guys in New York remember Frank Pryal, right? Writer for New York Times, restaurant reviewer.
Us old farts do.
Yeah, thanks. He wrote a review on a it was a new restaurant at the time. It was Rick Bayless's Topola Bombo Frontera Grill in Chicago. And the first review ever of this restaurant, what wine was written about that accompanied the food well, because Rick was an old friend and he loved when he tasted Megainos. Frank Pyle wrote about Megainos. So this wine, we've been at it for a while, and it's become one of the legendary cult wines of Greece, and it's been collected around the world. Production here, and let's talk about production a little bit. On the Grand Cuvée, we're only at about 800 cases per vintage. On Argos, we're at about 2,800, approximately.
Yep.
About 2,800 cases, 9-liter cases per vintage. There's not a lot of wine here, and and this is one of the rare wines from Greece that you'll find in people's private collections. You'll find at Sotheby's and Christie's auctions. It was the first Greek wine that you were, going back 15, 20 years, that were available in auctions. Even though these wines are very approachable in terms of price point at release, they accelerate and geometrically increase in value as they age, because the scarcity and because of their ability to age in the bottle. So we've done verticals of the wineries. We go all the way back to the early 90s. We don't have much of a library because, as George stated, he started in a garage. He built up from nothing. This winery would have been luxury to him 15 years ago. And so we had to sell every bottle of wine to pay for the next vintage. So keeping a library was kind of like impossible for us. We do now, and he has one of the most extensive libraries of this wine and his other reds and whites as well.
So
The Labyrinth.
The Labyrinth, oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
We should talk about that.
So is the Labyrinth going to be out front for them to taste?
Labyrinth is out there. Let's talk about that.
So not in front of you, but just so you know about it. There's a wine out front. There's a few, more than a few, gems out front. When we take the break here, you can go out there and taste. So Labyrinth, something that I've only gotten to taste at the winery. So now it's in a bottle.
Well, you want to talk? Tell them what it is.
Sure, let's tell them about Labyrinth now. We've teased them enough.
Well, go for it.
Oh, okay. Well, you explain. It's a
the
crazy
Labyrinth-
Solera thing.
Yeah, the Labyrinth is something we create that we started in 1999. Imagine a big, beautiful barrel of 1,000 liters, and we started to put the wine 1999 into. And then next year, we took out the 40% and we put into the 2000. And then next year, we took out the 40%, which was 99, 2000, and we bottled, and we put in the 2001. And every year, we do the same. And we create a beautiful, magnificent Solera of many, many, many vintages. So there is outside in the other room a labyrinth of 14 different vintages together. Please.
Yes, question. The barrel's 1,000 liters.
Yeah, it's a food of 1,000 liter, and there is a protocol of the 40%, and every 10 year we create 2 new Soleras. You see, we cut yeah, we split and we create new cellars. And this is a beautiful heritage for the next generations, but also it's a very, very fine wine. You can drink like reading a book. I mean, you need time to see and oxygenate the wine and spend at least a half hour with a glass of wine. It is something.
It unveils itself.
It's a complicated
system.
wine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, so to get back to these wines real quickly before we move on to Sinoro, glasses 1, 2, 3, 4. We've talked about the 01. We've talked about the 05. I will say, you know, in my opinion, the 01 is not not rapidly sliding down the hill because of these pHs. You know, these pHs are going to create, I think, more stable wine over the long term. So we've done a number of verticals where we taste back into the 90s
Right.
and even to the 80s, and the wines hold up quite well, though it does definitely show its age. Now, the 05, yeah, please, go ahead. You got the dregs. You got the leftovers. We're sorry. Yeah, they're yeah. Well, and cloudiness. I mean, it's not just a cosmetic thing. I think it actually changes, you know, the texture of the wine as well. Yeah, question in the back. So, talk about the fermentation process for Megasenis. When do these two, when do Cabernet and Ayurvedico come together?
Okay. We do everything separately because it's two different harvests and two different way of fermentations, two different ways of macerations, two different way of aging profile. For example, we use the Tronchet barrels for the Cabernet Sauvignon and not for the Ayurvedico. So after checking, after like 20 months after aging in the barrels, we do a tasting barrel by the barrel by the barrel. We take out everything which is not good. We think it's not good, and then we do the blend. And the blend, when we do the blend, we wait like 6 months before bottling because it must be very well homogenized everything, and another 2 years in the bottle in our facilities.
Again, malolactic in barrels.
Again, malolactic barrels, yeah.
So thoughts about 2010 and 2012? Anybody want to jump on board the 2010?
In
Likes?
2013, sorry.
I said, yeah, 12, but I meant 13. So 2010.
Magnificent. It was my so far. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the 2010 shows quite well. It's a 7-year-old wine, so it's not a baby by any means. But you know, this I hope helps support my statement a little bit that these pHs keep these wines fresher longer than one might otherwise expect. And then the 2013, again, we come back to the primaries, Andy's primaries. Sorry.
And also,
That's right, kindergarten, first grade.
And one other little side note on Megasenis, it does go through cycles of opening and closing. It does transform itself. It does dumb down and then reopen. It's pretty inexplicable that within 5 years of release that you start getting your chocolate-covered cherry profile in this wine. And the Ayurvedico starts taking over the Cabernet primary fruits that you typically find on release. Cabernet subsides, Ayurvedico starts taking over, and you start getting more dustiness and also dusty tannin qualities. So it's pretty wild. Like I could tell the age of the wine without looking at the vintage by just tasting it and knowing where part of its life it is.
Yeah, believe me or not, any vintage we open in the winery, it is something we have fun with because it's really, really, really so emotional. And in the meantime, it is really correct. And that's very important because Megasenis created a school in Greece. Now there's a lot of wines like that. A lot of people, a lot of winemakers making wine like that, and we are very proud of these beautiful vineyards.
All right.
Okay, so vineyards, and now we're on to Sinoro. So this is going to take you all the way to wines 8, 9, and 10 now. So once again, you should go ahead and hop in there. The booklet tells you what's in these wines because we have, well, let's put it this way. in this discussion, thus far, we've skirted around one subject that I think is always fair game to consider, which is that Megasenus was created to prove, if you will, that Ayurvedico was a noble grape or could make noble wine, but it nonetheless was also, I would assume, to some degree, a marketing statement to say this is a grape you know alongside a grape you don't know. But there was a certain amount of insecurity in this, in the sense that will Cabernet help Ayurvedico? Then we have Grand Cuvée, in which we see, Ayurvedico doesn't need any help. And then we come to these wines, and I have to admit, I'm the sort of person that says, I don't really want to see international varieties, so-called international varieties in Greek vineyards. I would like to see the 250 or 300 fascinating indigenous grape varieties. Really, I'd like them to get the headlines. I'd like them to get the notoriety. On the other hand, I'll turn it over to George.
Yeah, the thing is, okay, this vineyard we designed in a white book, you see. We just was inspired by all those beautiful varieties, and it is like 40% of Cabernet Franc, 40% of Merlot, and 20% of Ayurvedico. Please start your tasting by, this is neighbor. The name Cinero means borders, and it is because it is bordering like Ayurvedico, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc. But what we love in this winery, it is to smell the Cabernet Franc, then taste the Merlot, the volume of the Merlot in the mouth, and in between recognize the acidity of the Ayurvedico. And to understand that, start by the number 10, which is the youngest in this tasting, and then go back to the old tastings. And you will tell me if you smell the Cabernet Franc, and as I told you, tasting this wine. We still are at about 2,000 feet of altitude.
Well, a little bit.
Yeah?
Yeah, right around that.
Yeah. Keep on.
Yeah, so anybody want to, since George suggested, let's start with the youngest, the 11, which is a 6-year-old at this point, 5.5 years old. Thoughts on glass number 10? Anybody want to weigh in? Anyone care not to weigh in? Yes, thank you.
Well, I think with
They're very subdued, Doug.
I think with the new people looking towards the Loire area, this would be an easy jump over, like, go to Greece now. Like, this is the wine for you.
That sounds lovely to me because I drink a lot of Loire wines. I like my red wines more curranty than plummy and raisiny, and so I like wines of higher acidity like this. I think again it's really fascinating to see how the grapes either congeal or they don't, and it's up to you to decide that. But I think it's certainly interesting. Here it's a little easier to pry them apart. And as you say, to see the Cabernet Franc nose, to find the Merlot mouth, and the Ayurvedico acidity. But,
And of course, how it is aged.
Right. And, and George flipped the script here, because typically he'll work with the indigenous and pepper him with non-indigenous. Now he went completely in a different direction. But he did it because years ago we had talked about, non-indigenous varieties and how do we present them and where their role is. And George also thought that these non-indigenous varieties, when they're cultivated at high levels and vinified at high levels, they're great ambassadors. And George loves Cab Franc, and he loves Merlot, and he likes Left Bank Bordeaux's, or Right Bank Bordeaux, sorry. And he thought that he could make an exceptional wine from these varieties in this region because he is a vineyard-driven guy. If he sees a plot of land that inspires him, then he goes for it. And I think this wine really shows that even in this region where we have our own history and our own varieties, that a talented winemaker and a proper viticulture, we can cultivate other grapes and make them at a very high threshold. And I believe that this is a wine that shows more of a modern interpretation of George and more of your winemaking, more new world.
Yeah,
to some degree?
Let's say it's how the Greek wine can be international. That's it.
And you can see here, actually, there's interesting row orientation differences here, once again, reflecting what George believes is the best possible exposure, sunlight exposure to a difficult
And
sun.
protection.
Yeah, and exactly more
Protection.
more about protection than about exposure.
Here's the vineyard.
So other thoughts. We started with 10, so let's go backwards to glass number 9. Does anybody want to speak towards glass number 9, the 2007? Thoughts on that one? How aging has happened? If something good has happened in this? Yeah, please.
I think the grape varieties already work together right now as times pass with this vintage. And also the scenario for me is more as a passport for anybody never drink a Greek wine. So by showing him that, you can show him the savoir-faire for these magnificent winemakers and eventually introduce him to something more indigenous.
Yeah, I love the thought of it. I mean, it's always going to be an argument. Should that happen? Would international varieties be the best way forward? And as I say, I will admit quite openly, my bias these days is to say, hey, we're done with that. We don't need to do that anymore. We can focus upon these grapes on their own. On the other hand, as I say, I would not want to in any way negate a wine like this that is clearly fascinating and gives people, to your point, gives people the opportunity to see how these wines are structured by acidity. And that's not what one expects of a quote-unquote hot, dry country of this sort. But it's the grapes working, or in this case, it's the elevation working for us. And then we come to glass number 8. So any thoughts on glass number 8? That's our 2006. Any further thoughts on that one? Anybody? You can yell it out. It's delicious. I like Andy's
thank
way
you.
of doing it.
Thank you.
That's Andy's version of it. Anybody else? Preferences over this? I'll go ahead and do that. Let's vote on these three. So glass number 10. Who prefers glass number 10? And you can vote early and often, like in Chicago.
Yeah, exactly.
Unlike in Florida, we'll actually count them. So
No hanging chads.
yeah, exactly. So glass number 10 preferences. How many? Anybody? No. Glass number 9. Who prefers that? Aha. And glass number 8. Who prefers that? The overwhelming favorite. Time does everything.
Exactly.
Good. Well, so speaking of a vertical, and this is a mini vertical that we're going to do in
Not
glasses.
enough money to buy time,
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to do a mini vertical in glasses 11, 12, and 13.
Yep.
But this is a pretty fascinating story as well, because this is certainly not a grape variety that people would normally foresee as having a long life ahead of it. Maybe you should talk to that a little bit, why you decided there might be such a thing as age-worthy Muscofilero.
Look, we started to cultivate the Muscofilero and to make wine from 1989. And we know the Muscofilero very, very well. Muscofilero, it comes from the center of Peloponnese. The center of Peloponnese, yes, please. In the plateau of Mantinia. It's a very beautiful plateau at about 2,400 feet in elevation. Very cold up there. And this beautiful, this beautiful variety, it is really in his region, because this variety needs very cold weather. Imagine that most of the harvest, they come on October, and the variety, it is the Muscofilero. It is very, you can see the color on the skin. The variety, it is very named about the aromatics and the beautiful acidity. But everybody knows that if you walk in a vineyard with Muscofilero, there is so many different colors in the grapes. So there are different clones. So there is the white Muscofilero called Asprofilero. There is the Coquinofilero, which is the red Muscofilero, the Xanthofilero, which is the blonde Muscofilero, a lot of them, and one which is the Mavrofilero. The Mavrofilero, it's the black Muscofilero. And the wine Salto is made just from that. 2004, we created vineyard by clonal selection, and we knew that the wine, it is so expressive coming from those vineyards. So it's a clonal selection based on the Mavro Filero. The wines you have in front of you, we started release wine in 2011. It's something new for us. It's a new toy for us. But we really, very quickly, we saw the characteristic of that wine, which goes very nice in this bottle for aging. And for that, we have 3 different vintages here to see how nicely there is a beautiful evolution in the wine. And mind you, look at the characteristic on the nose, which is, always very fine white flowers and with, just a touch of lemon and citrus and a lot of minerality and the acidity, which is marvelous. There is no sugar at all in those wines, 100%, and it is all those wines from 11 to 12 degrees of alcohol.
So,
pH is around 3, and this wine is made by wild yeast, which is very important for having all this beautiful complexity in the wine.
And I would add to this, just to put the pH in perspective, so a classic pH, if you will, from California would be probably 3.7. Somewhere along the lines of 3.55 has always been one of the great classics of Bordeaux. You get down into white wines, and it's not unusual to see 3.4s and 3.5s. That is one of the issues about these wines, that we're dealing with wines that are around 3 or so pH. And even in the case of the Santorini wines, we're going to see down to 2.9 and things like that. And it starts to become life-threatening at numbers lower than that. I'm only barely exaggerating. It will dissolve your teeth, once you start to get down into 2.7s and 2.5s and stuff like that. But fortunately, wine doesn't do that.
And please discover the saltiness existing in the wine under the tongue. It's unbelievable. This wine is famous for having, summer days. And of course, with everything, oysters and everything coming from the sea, alive.
Yep. So let's put this in perspective. Until this point, until the Salto, Moscofilero for generations and decades was considered a white wine that was consumable now. Nobody would ever had envisioned aging Moscofilero. Nobody cultivated it for age potential or vinified it for age for cellaring. It was not a really highly respected appellation for a long time. That's why when George Skouras started making Moscofilero and his other bottlings, we do 2 bottlings at the winery. We have 100% Moscofilero, which is we're very proud of this thing that United Airlines has chosen it. First time an American carrier has chosen it. A Greek wine, because some guy I know.
Yeah, let me just say, it's a lot easier. I've been trying to place Moscofilero on United for like 5 years. It gets easier when it's, meet your new boss. His last name is Samartzis. And you do one of those, is that Greek? Well, yes, it is. Do you like Greek wines? Well, yes, I do. And that's how that happened. Okay?
It took us a while.
I've been trying for years.
But that wine is a population wine, so all 5 clones are in that wine. But even in those initial vinifications, like a little anecdotal story, George and I were visiting my cellar about 5-6 years ago, and I pulled out an original label 1998, 97, I forgot, Megainos White. So the old Moscofilero used to be Megainos White way back when. And and he's like, "Oh my God, don't do this to me." I go, "Let's open it for fun. Let's see what's going on here." He's like, "All right," and it was magnificent. It was outstanding, and in that he realized not only that moment, but in other moments that he realized that there's something else going on here. The Moscofilero can be can be vinified for aging potential and for more complexity. So the other Moscofilero is much more lush and giving and generous, while this one is a little bit more austere, in my opinion. Here we're, for 25 years that I've been doing this and trying to promote Greek wines and trying to educate the American public on Greek varieties, I've had to draw bridges to people to realize, to put in context, not because they're genetically related or they're similar, but to kind of put a flavor profile on it. The regular Moscofilero is like almost like Alsatian Gewürztraminer to me. It has those kind of aromatics to it.
But
Doesn't
with
have
good
the viscosity.
pH, with good acidity
right.
and good
Yeah, but not that oily viscosity. Here, to me, this is more Sylvaner-ish. This is more in the world of Gruner, and we have 5 minutes. So we we're trying to fit a lot of information in a short period of time.
Yeah,
We're getting the axe here. We're getting so I think I have to stop talking.
Well, how do people feel about these three vintages here? So we're looking at 12, 14, and 15. Again, do you want to just go, what's your favorite out of the three, or do you have comments in this regard? Yeah, hang on. Let me bring you the mic so you can hear. Okay.
Thank you. So I think with this wine, from when I first tasted the first vintage that you made, it was apparent that the aromatics were, I think, a lot less exotic than in the other Moscofilero, and run more. It's intensely aromatic still, but the aromatics it's more of a fennel and like you said, white flowers than that really exotic stuff. Is that the clone, or is that the yeast, or is it a combination of both?
It is, thank you. The thing is it is the clone one. The second, it is like, we love to do harvest not exactly in the right maturation. I mean, a little bit a week before, a little bit more green grapes than the. And the other thing, it is, of course, the affair of the wild yeast.
And
Of
one of
course,
the other questions.
both all that, it's the combination to have a little less aromatics than the Moscofilero.
And also bear in mind that this is also bottled in Stelvin, while the others in Cork. Actually, George Skouras pioneered Stelvin in Greece. For 15 years ago, he introduced Stelvin in Greece, and it's taken him a long time to get the Greeks to start using Stelvin, and now Stelvin is quite popular now. And so this has a little bit to do also with the aromatic profile. The clone itself, because it has more pigmentation, it also expresses itself differently than the combination of the population wine.
And I'd add to that, just that saltiness, I think, is a landscape issue. I don't think it's a sulfur issue. I don't think it's a clonal issue or a grape variety issue. I think that's really the land speaking. But that's something that we're still sorting out. I use that as an opportunity to say, yes, I snuck the M word in when you weren't looking. Yes, it has mineral character, and I don't understand why it is popular these days to pretend or to mock the notion of minerality when it's as obvious in these wines as it could possibly be.
And
we'll
stay tuned to seminar number 2.
Yeah, I was going to say, wait until you taste Santorini, and then I usually think of the people who say that there's no such thing as minerality in wine as they're selling, what's that word? Oh, bullshit. That's right, they're selling bullshit. Exactly. But anyway, so yeah. Thoughts on these three? What's your favorite? I'm just curious. Who prefers glass number, what is it, number 10 is the 2012? And, yeah, thank you, 11, 12, 13, sorry. Glass number 11 is the 2012. You prefer that. Who prefers glass number 12, the 2014? And who prefers the last glass 13, the 2015? Pretty much evenly split, and we'll see. We'll see what happens with these wines. I think that the notion of aging white wine, particularly aromatic white wines, the notion of aging those wines is still one that is in development. I've had those experiences a couple of times in my life where I've had great surprises with aromatic wines and their age-worthiness that I didn't foresee. For instance, I opened a 91 Cloudy Bay Sauvignon Blanc a couple of years ago and fell out of my shoes because I'm sorry, I didn't see this coming, and I normally haven't seen it coming at all. I've tasted older versions. This was exciting. It wasn't at all like the 1978 Haut-Brion Blanc, which I will still say I have one bottle left in the cellar. I was lucky enough to get like a case of it. and I drank it over the last 10 years, and every bottle has been more glorious than the last. So things are happening in wines if they are pH stable enough that I think can be exciting and sometimes surprising.
The progression of aromatics is clear between 11, 12, and 13. Is that because of the vintage, the way you treated the vines? What do you attribute it to?
No, I think it's the vintages. Different vintages, different conditions, you know, because it's another extreme vineyard, which is very connected to the weather and to the climatic conditions. It's for that, yeah. Yeah.
So 12 was not as aromatic when it was young.
Yeah.
15 is now.
Yeah, it is normally the younger vintages is more aromatic. Yeah. You're right.
Another question over here.
So I'm used to, with Assyrtiko, looking specifically for a saline quality. And Muscofilero, I very rarely see it. Is this attributed to your parcel? Because I normally don't have it on my radar to even look for this type of thing that presents itself in your wines.
Yeah, it is really the parcels and yes, that's it.
Yeah, something about the land
Yeah.
does it, and not really sure why. I certainly can't connect those dots yet. It's just, wow, there it is, you know. Good. So any other questions? Question here.
At what Brix and pH are you looking for with these white wines? If if you had an average, for your pH, would you ever blend an earlier harvest with a little bit of a later harvest if you thought the pH was too low on the early harvest?
Look, it depends. It is, those are decisions we have to make because on October, it's always problems with the rains and climatic conditions. Not really the best to get all the harvest healthy and everything. So we have to understand the climatic conditions and to react upon to them. That's one thing. The second thing, it is always for those wines we love to have this beautiful acidity, means pH, because it's their passport to their life. Without this kind of pH, you cannot wait to have wine like 5 and 10 years later. And yes, it is a characteristic of, it's a very natural characteristic of this variety in this particular piece of land.
And also, Muscofilero is notorious for uneven ripeness. So you can have uneven ripeness between rows and even in clusters. So you have to do really precision harvesting here. So you just can't simply, in the bigger companies, and for years, all they did is they go through and take it and try to fix it in the winery. Here, and George has been doing it since day one, even before the Salto. It's about proper harvesting, going through the rows and waiting. And sometimes, yes, you will do some early picking, and then you'll go back a week later and do some later picking and blend those two together so to get the proper balance. And that's what you were asking, I believe.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, okay.
Well, listen, our time is done, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I hope some of you, if not all of you, are able to stick around for the next seminar. But we're going to take about 30 minutes or slightly more
To reset the room. And
yeah.
please dump your wine.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind dumping out your wine glasses, that would
that'd
really
be
help
great.
us out
We
into
ha-
the
And
dump
also, we have
buckets.
Greek wine maps that you can grab on the way out. If you are sitting through all 3 seminars, please hold on to your books. Also,
Yeah, save those books. You'll need them again.
And then please taste out through these wines. And we need to take one. Do we have to do this thing?
And